Hello, my name is Dick Feeney. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about Eau Claire then and now. Before we talked about highways and trains and airplanes, but today we're going to go into another form of transportation, the public transportation. The first kind of public transportation we had, of course, was the stagecoach. Was the only overland transportation there was, or your own wagon or your own buggy or horseback. But in 1879, Eau Claire started the Eau Claire Street Railway, and this was an actual railroad track that was laid down the center of the street, but it was pulled by a horse. So they called a horse car. And the Eau Claire Street Railway barns and garages were behind this house on 2nd Avenue. There you can see the horse out in front and one of the horse cars. And here is the same house today. This is right across from the courthouse on 2nd Avenue. The old barns are gone, but the house is still there. Then in 1889, they found that someone went to New York or somewhere and found out how to wind electric motors. And they decided that they could electrify these same old horse cars. Now these are a pair of those old horse cars, and they built their own electric motors here in Eau Claire to make the electric streetcars. And they were built in this factory, the National Electric Company, on the edge of Half Moon Lake. And that building is still there. And this is the old part of it where the National Electric was, and this part has been added on, but you can see the same exact form to the windows and everything. It's the same building. Well, in 1889, when they did this, they were the 4th city in the world to have electric streetcars. The first one, I believe, was Richmond, Virginia, and St. Joseph, Missouri, and I forget the other one, but the Eau Claire was the 4th city in the world to have electric streetcars. Now this is a little bit later model. This one was made actually to be a streetcar. The power was supplied from overhead by a single line, and it was grounded through the track on the bottom. And they had a spring-loaded little dolly wheel that ran on the wire overhead. This is Barstow Street. We see an old streetcar here in the middle of Barstow Street. This is Barstow and Grand Avenue, which was known as the Four Corners. This was the center of downtown Eau Claire. The east and west streetcars, you see the other streetcars going the other way. They met on the hour and the quarter hour, and you could transfer from one line to the other so that you could go just about anywhere in Eau Claire by streetcar. This is a picture of the Motorman Station. Most of these had a control on either end of the car, and when the man wanted to change direction when he got to the end of the line, he just undid the lever from the one end and carried it back to the other end and hooked it on in the back. And they went up and they switched the pulley on the electrical pickup on the wire. They pulled one down and pushed the other one up, and they turned around and went the other way. They didn't have to have a turnaround at the end of the street. Something they did have to have was a place to pass. And here you see there are two cars passing each other. This is the old Eau Claire High School on Grand Avenue. And to do that, they had to make a Y in the track and a passing lane. And here you can see on Grand Avenue, you can still see the lines in the street where that passing lane was, where it widens out. This is where the main track was, and here it widens out, and then it comes back together again. And up here is where the old Eau Claire High School used to be. Now the Grand Avenue apartments. This is a shot down on Menominee Street. The tracks going crossways is the old Milwaukee Railroad. And this is looking up toward Mount Washington, which is down in Shawtown. This is right about where the Dairy Queen is now. And just before that, just before where the Milwaukee tracks were, was the later barns where they had the streetcars and later the buses. This was the old barn sat right along the Milwaukee tracks on the left side, on the south side of Menominee Street. This is a job where they're replacing the streetcar track in about 1925. This is looking up Bellinger Street. The thing that's of interest on this is the old firehouse. This is the old firehouse that used to be on the end of Bellinger Street, on the corner of Bellinger and Platt Street. And this one is on South Barstow. This is about where the Social Security office is now, looking northwards toward downtown. This is the downtown area down here. They're putting new streetcar tracks in. Then they also had what they called the Interurban Coach, and this was a special line that went from Eau Claire to Chippewa Falls, and this went up through along next to the existing railroad that goes to Chippewa. And in the summer they had an open air coach, and you got down, there was like a running board along the side, and the seats went all the way from one side to the other, so you could just hop onto this running board and jump right into a seat, and sometimes they didn't even hardly stop. They just sort of let you hop on as they went by. And this was a much nicer thing. It was a little bit cooler for summer times. It had curtains that could be rolled down on the sides here if it started to rain. This one happens to say Shawtown on it. So this is the old track going to Chippewa Falls. Instead of going up Birch Street, it went up Omaha Street. This is the cemetery area up on Omaha Street and Star Avenue. This is the beginning of the curve to go to Star Avenue. The track ran part of the way out on Star Avenue and then switched over to parallel with the other railroad tracks. Now up at Lake Hallie, they had a little pavilion there and a place they called Electric Park. And this is a place that was it belonged to the power company, and they promoted picnics and parties and things there, and they had this little depot along the Interurban, and had the sign on it. Here you see the sign says Electric Park. Now there is a little bit of a trace of that left. You can see the foundation here. This is the foundation of that old depot, or waiting shelter. This is where the track ran. You can see the old grade there. This is the first crossing by Lake Hallie, and right over here now is where the new press company is. They call Electric Park area for the new press company that does the Eau Claire Leader telegram. And this is a picture in Electric Park of one of the many picnics. A lot of people would ride the car up to Lake Hallie, and there was a nice stairway that went down to the lake, and they had a bathing beach down there, and even a steamboat to take rides on the lake. They had this sort of combination water tower, windmill, and band pavilion. They had like a band shell sort of thing there, where they had the bands for dancing. And they also had an outdoor motion picture theater. Here we see the screen, and this was where the projection booth was, and this was all the seats. And until they built the press company out there, a lot of the old remnants of the Electric Park were there, like this old merry-go-round. And this was the place, this is the remains of the old Hoot, which was the dance pavilion. And this operated right up into the 1950s as a young people's dancing spot. And this is just a nice view of Lake Hallie that's over the bank. This was the view from where the old Hoot would have been. And the very end of the line after it went to Chippewa Falls is in Irvine Park, and this old station is still there, just as you go in the east gate of Irvine Park. This is off from Jefferson Avenue here, and if you go in the east gate, just to the left of the gate is the last remaining part of the old interurban line, is the Irvine Park station. Well, getting into the next thing was getting into buses, and about 1920 or so, this bus operated in Eau Claire. It wasn't a regular city bus, so to speak. It was more of a station wagon thing. It was hired by the three hotels, the major hotels in Eau Claire, which were the Eau Claire, the Galloway, and the Commercial at that time. And they would meet all the trains at the depot, and people could get a ride from the train to their hotel. This happens to be my uncle driving the bus, was Andy Garton, and this is my mother and my grandparents. I was along for a little ride one day. Well, in 1932, they decided the streetcars were pretty expensive to maintain, and they were too hard to change the routes. And the city was beginning to grow. They decided that buses would be more appropriate, and so they hired or bought this fleet of Mack buses. I believe they started out with 14 of them, and they abandoned the streetcar. But the thing was still owned by the Northern States Power Company. These were pretty nice buses for their day. They were pretty solid machines and pretty durable because they lasted a long time and with thousands and thousands of miles on them. I like the uniform that the bus driver wore here. He sort of looks like he might be a Gestapo agent or something. But that was sort of the thing of the times. And still the meeting place for the buses was still the Four Corners. This is on Grand Avenue looking east. This was the old Branstad's drugstore, which later became the Actor drugstore. This was the Culver building. And in the bottom of that was the Woolworth dime store. And this is one of the old buses. This one happens to be on the corner of Western Avenue and Seymour Road. This place now is the seafood place here. It used to be the tank car gasoline, and this Western Avenue used to be, of course, Highway 53. The new highway now comes right about through here. In 1939, the first rear-engine buses came out. These were also Macks, and they were quite a modern thing for the day. But they had the engine in the back. You can see the grill back here, and the driver sat way up ahead of the front wheels. It gave him a much better view of the road and for people walking in front of him and whatnot. And about that time, the Fies bought the line too. It was sold by Northern States and became a separate operation. This is just a couple of pictures here of down Barstow Street. This one here first is taken about 1918. Here we see the streetcars running on the track. This happened to be the impromptu parade that developed at the end of the First World War. You can see all these people sort of just whatever they could think of, they made up a float or a display and brought it down the street. And we noticed the old Barnes building was there, but the hotel was gone. The hotel had burned in 1918, and so that block is entirely empty. Well, now this is a picture in the 1930s. You see the cars are a little different. The hotel is there. The Barnes block is still there. And we have one of our 1930s buses on the corner here. And now this just happened to come out this way, but this is a picture taken about 10 years later in the 40s. We have the new bank building has been added here, and we have a bus in the same place as the new type bus with the flat front and the rear engine in the very exact spot. And here's a view looking the other way, and there's one of those 1939 buses. Well, then they developed into a little bit bigger bus, and they went to the GM coach, and they ran through probably into the 70s. These are quite familiar to everybody, the old red and yellow buses. Well, in the early 70s, the city took over the operation and got a whole set of new buses with the ETC on the side that was to put transportation in Eau Claire. Between the T became between the E and the C. And they were very nice, pretty multicolored buses, and I believe there's still some of those that are still running today. And the next step was they went to this Chance bus, is a smaller white bus. They've been around for probably since the 80s. And now they changed the location for the transfer point from being at the Four Corners to down between Farwell Street and Barstow near Gray Street, between Main and Gray. And this is a much safer operation because when you stopped in the Four Corners, everybody had to cross the street through all the traffic, which at that time was all the main highways of 12 and 53 went right up Barstow Street. So there was a lot of traffic, and you had to cross the street from going from one bus to the other. Now you just get off and walk down the sidewalk a little ways and get back on your other bus without getting into the traffic at all. And this is a couple of the newer buses. The latest editions is one of the Grummans. And also the very latest is the new Flyer. This one has a very nice, it's built very low to the ground, and they have a ramp that comes out for wheelchairs so they can pick up a person in a wheelchair right from the curb. Very, very handy feature. Well, then we'll get into some other kinds of transportation, and we'll start out with motorcycles. This is back in the teens. Notice the old barn with all the circus posters on it here. This was a very common thing in those days, that they came around ahead of the circus for several months and put up these posters of when it was going to be in town. Well, there they seem to be having a little bit of trouble with this one cycle. Something's wrong with it, and here they end up towing it home. But you can see it's an old Harley Davidson. You can see the name on the side. I think it's a 1914 Harley Davidson. This happens to be my uncle's. It was Claude and Andy Garton. And even the dog gets in the act. There you can see the old one-cylinder Harley Davidson. And about that time, the automobile came into great use, and this was about 1915. Was on a trip to Chicago. They started out, and my family made a trip to Chicago in 1915 with a Model T Ford. There were no road maps. There were no marked highways. The only way you'd use the railroad map to tell what town you were looking for, and you stopped along the way and asked, how do you get to Stevens Point from here? But it took them about 3 days to get to Chicago, and they camped out along the way, but it was quite a remarkable excursion. Another view of the old Model T in that day with the old Crestolite tank on the side that operated the headlights, or something about like an acetylene torch, that they would get the bright light from the acetylene instead of having electric lights. And along the way going to Chicago, or going anywhere for that matter, you always had tire trouble. And this is my granddad and my uncle repairing the tire. He's repairing the tube over the fender here. You can see they just pried it right off the rim. They didn't take the wheel off like they do now. They just pried the tire right off the rim. And here my granddad is putting a boot inside the tire. That was to patch the hole in the tire so that the tube wouldn't bulge out through the hole. Usually tires were pretty fragile, and they put boots in them many times before they gave up on them and put a new tire on. Quite an unusual thing. They had a spotlight. That was quite a thing for those days. And they finally got to Chicago, and they already had the traffic jam in Chicago. And of course, cars didn't go very fast, but they still had this jam of curb-to-curb traffic. But they'd already come up with a double-decker bus, and there are many different bus systems that worked there, but this was quite a remarkable one. It was a double-deck bus, plumb full, top and bottom. This is another old car my uncle had, was a Saxon. This is sort of the almost like a sports car. It was built real low to the ground compared to the other ones that were built real high. You can see this, the hood is almost level with the fender line. This one is an old Franklin. This was an air-cooled car. This is about a 1920 model. Of course, they had the top, all of them had convertible tops, except they had side curtains that they could put on. This is a Burdick. This is a car that was actually built in Eau Claire in 1909, I believe it was. It was had a Continental engine. Was a 590 cubic inches, a huge engine. It had put out 85 horsepower. It sold for about $7,000. And then they had another one that was called the Greyhound, that had 95 horsepower. But they didn't last very long. It was only 1 year, I believe, that they made them. And they were sort of made up out of assortment of odd pieces, and according to the people that had them, they didn't ride very good. Now into the local delivery and truck system. This is an old truck for the Iki Dairy Company. This happens to be my uncle driving it. He did that for quite a few years. The old hard rubber tires, and the engine was under the seat. This is an old International. You can see that it picked up the milk from the farms in the old cream cans. This is a little bit later model. This is a Republic truck. Still has the hard rubber tires on it. Here's an old moving van who got stuck going over the curb to back into somebody's house. Looks like a mini motorhome. And this is an ice truck. This, you see, still has the heavy wheels and the hard rubber tires because it carried pretty heavy loads. And look at the size of that steering wheel. That takes a man to drive that. Although that's my mother up there trying it out. This is another one of the old Republic trucks from Eakes. There he's stuck in the snow. He's got chains on, but he still seems to be having a problem with it. There's another picture of the old Eakes trucks. Those were Internationals there. Well, the delivery of milk, that was a common thing from the early days because milk was something that spoiled easily. And so it was very essential to get it to the customer as fast as possible. Well, now we go to our supermarket and pick it up and put it in our refrigerator, and it stays for several days, and we don't even think anything of it. But in those days, if it wasn't delivered immediately, it could spoil, because they did not have the pasteurization. So they had the local delivery. This is a typical one with the horse-drawn. They carried the horse-drawn ones away into the early 30s. And the thing that was nice about this, the horse knew the way. And the man would get out with his little case of milk and go from door to door, and the horse would just follow him along down the alley. And he even watched, the horse would look back and watch where his axles were going so he didn't snag the telephone pole when he came out of the alley. But then, of course, mechanism took over that business too, and here we see the man still with the old carrier for the milk bottles, making the private deliveries to the houses. And that carried on right up into the early 70s. You could still get milk from the Dolly Madison Dairy. This is an old Divco milk truck from the 70s. But you see they've already got to the cartons there. Another thing that was quite common was the limousine service. And this, my uncle did that for a while. Here he is in his chauffeur's uniform with an old Winton town car. This is a very elegant machine with about like what a Lincoln town car would be today, or maybe even a little better. It was complete with a little lamp on the side of it, and the window that rolled up between the chauffeur and the passengers. And they had quite a bit of service of that for weddings and that sort of thing. Well, then my uncles went into the garage business, and they built this garage on Bellinger Street. Notice the old brick street here yet. This was the Garten Brothers garage. It was on Bellinger, just south of Madison Street. And they had repair and storage, plus a wrecker service. This is an old Rio wrecker. Now, this building is still in existence, and it's now the Royal Credit Union on Bellinger Street. But it's sort of been redone. The outside of it's completely redone, and the inside too. This is the inside of the old garage. They had a lot of these places. People did not have garages to keep their cars in, and those that wanted to drive them in the wintertime hired a heated garage like this to put their car in. And they would send their chauffeur down to pick up the car and warm it up and bring it down to their house and take them where they were going to go. Or some people would come themselves to the place and get their car. But they were always nice and warm so that they would start in the wintertime. Another view inside the old garage. And this was the crew, the repair crew and the office girl. Another group of the mechanics. They did quite a bit of repair work there. They also had a gas pump out front. There's the old Rio wrecker with the chains on the back of it. And this is some of their jobs that they hauled in. They had dolly wheels they could put under them just like they do today to haul in the serious ones that weren't towable. There's one alongside the road. Not too serious, the one there. Looks like the spring shackle bolt broke. Then we had a few car dealers that went in different places around Eau Claire. This is sort of an unusual one. This one is in a building that alternated between being a car dealership and a theater. And it had the sloping floor underneath and had another floor over the top of it. This time it was the Plymouth Dealer. This is right across from Northern States on Barstow Street, where the big parking lot is now. And later was the Eau Claire Theater, and at one time it was a Hupmobile dealer, because when this building was still standing, you could see the name had been painted over, but it sort of weathered through, and you could see it said Hupmobiles on the side of it. This is another downtown auto company. This is the Tanberg Auto Company. This is at 505 South Barstow, across from the old Federal Building, where the Acoustic Cafe is. This was the General Motors dealer. They handled Buick and Chevrolet, I believe. Another view of the Tanberg Auto. At that time, it says now the Ward's Annex. So when this picture was taken, it's now been a couple of cafes have been in there since then. This later became the Wood Motor Company, which was the Chevrolet dealer for many years. This is my folks' old 27 Chevy that they bought, brand new, from the Tanberg Auto. You can see they gave them a free tire cover with their name on it, just like they do today. They put their little name plaques on when you buy a new car. Well, this one they put it right on the spare tire cover. It's Tanberg Auto. This is a 1927 Chevy Coupe, and it got lots of use in very strange places and weird roads, which were a little bit better than horse trails. This is my cousin and my sister, and got to be used to haul the old canoe. This is an old canvas and wood hook canoe. You don't see too many of those anymore. It's one that my dad built. This is my dad on the left. And they used to go on many picnics down along the Chippewa River, place across from the sand and gravel. They used to call it the snake patch, because we saw a big old bull snake there one time. This is very reminiscent of the picnic they have in Bonnie and Clyde, where they go out in the woods and meet in this old place next to the sand and gravel works. It always reminds me of that when I look at this picture. Along the banks of the Chippewa River, just down below the Shawtown Bridge. Well, we're going to go into a different line of things here. We're going to go into a little bit about the city waterworks. The original waterworks for Eau Claire came from the Wheaton Springs. As you can see, there's a dike along here. This is where the Wheaton Springs is, this little pond in here. And there's an old gateway into it. And this is Jeffers Road, and I believe this is Town Line Road, the very upper end of Dell's Pond. And the water went in a wooden pipe down along the river. This is another view of the Wheaton Spring with the dike around it. This is looking down the Chippewa River. But they buried this old wooden pipe that was made like a barrel with the hoops around it. And they were all beveled so they fit tight together and clamped with these big clamps to make them tight. There's a 16-inch water main. Came all the way from Wheaton Springs down to the area of the old Wells Road. And when they lowered the water in Dell's Pond, this thing appeared again, and people had forgotten completely about it. You can see how the boards are all beveled so that they fit tight together with the clamp on it. And they cut a section of this piece out here, and it's now in the Chippewa Valley Museum. If you go over there, you can see a piece of the actual old water main. Well, from there, the water pipe went across right along parallel. This is Old Wells Road here, just to be to the north of the North Crossing. And there was this big pit in there that's a big concrete pit. And what that was a big filter. And the purpose of that was to filter out all the strange things that came through the pipe from the Wheaton spring. But even then, occasionally, a small fish would come out of your faucet, you know, in the city works. They didn't quite have it completely figured out how to keep the fish from coming through. And here's another part of the old waterworks. This pipe ran along. This pipe is still sticking out of the bank right along the edge of Wells Road. It's a little closer because they widened the road out now. Well, from there, the pipe went across the river and came out by the paper mill. And that's where the chlorinization plant is by the paper mill. Well, this is another thing that's at the end of Wells Road is what they called White City. And this was a great place to camp in the summertime. And they called it White City because of all the white tents that were there. And this would be people would go out there and set up their tent and live along the banks of the river there just for the summertime. And in the nice weather, and the men would probably go to work and the women would stay there, and the kids would play in the water, and it was kind of a fun place. They later called it Breezy Point. Now this is a little bit different line of things. This is down on Menominee Street. This is Menominee Street on the right here, and this is the old Shaw Lumber Company. This was where the DJ's gas station is now. This would be Sherman Creek. Claremont Avenue would go right across about here. And this was the main part of the Shaw Lumber Company. This is the office of the Shaw Lumber Company. This is what it looked like here a few years ago. There was the outlet to Half Moon Lake and Sherman Creek ran together. They went on a bridge underneath Menominee Street and on another bridge underneath Claremont Avenue. And you know, the Shaw Lumber Company would have been over here. Well, now this is the old station when it was still a Clark station. This is right about where the old pump house of the Shaw Lumber Company was. This is the way it looks now. They completely rebuilt it with the many lane street here, and they completely eliminated the bridge under Menominee Street here, and Sherman Creek goes across on the other side of the road through a tunnel that's a block or so long and doesn't come across Claremont at all. And this is looking the other way at this intersection of the modern intersection. And this is the way it used to look. There's the old pump house on the right, and these two big grain elevators was the Crescent Roller Mills, was one of the largest elevators in the state at the time. And that stood on the what's now the northeast corner of Menominee Street and Claremont Avenue. Well, there's another view of the old Shaw Lumber Company. This is right down along the river on what's called Race Street. And that wasn't for racing horses or racing cars. It was for the mill race, which was the outlet they called the lower race to Half Moon Lake, was the outlet of Half Moon Lake. And here's the old Shaw Lumber Company office. This is along South Michigan Street. And if you go down there today, you can still see the same building. You see the line of the roof is exactly the same. The windows are all changed, but it's still the same building, and it's now an apartment building on South Michigan Street. But that is the old office of the Shaw Lumber Company is still there. Now we're going to go up to the Phoenix Manufacturing Company. This was along the Chippewa River on the east side, just south of Madison Street. This would be Wisconsin Street here. Notice the old house here that says office on it. And this is the old Milwaukee Road Bridge. You can see it's a different bridge than the one that's there now. This would be St. Patrick's Church here. And this tower is one of the towers that they used to have arc lights on. The way they lit the city was they had several of these towers around town with an arc light on the top of them. That's one of those arc light towers. And you notice the train going through here. This would have been the old Milwaukee Road that went to Chippewa Falls by way of Forest Street and up across Wells Road. Well, there's the old house that was the office to the Shaw Lumber, or to the Phoenix Manufacturing Company. That's just recently been torn down in the last year. Well, this is what they made at the Phoenix Manufacturing, was the old Phoenix log hauler. This was a locomotive with the pistons ran up and down with connecting rods here, which ran a shaft which drove Caterpillar tracks. And it was steered on the front by a pair of sled runners. And here's the fellow that did the steering sat out in the front and turned the steering wheel, which faced backwards. But that wound up the chain on the bottom here that in different, they could wind it up one way or the other to turn the sled runners at the front of it. And here's one of those old engines still in operation. You see the smoke coming out of it. They have wheels on the front of it so that they can run it on the dry ground. And this was one came from Wabeno, but they brought it down to Carson Park for a special 4th of July demonstration. So this is some of the old buildings of the Phoenix. This is the actual building that the locomotive engines were built in. This is the way it looked not too long. This is the corner. This is Forest Street, and this is Wisconsin Street. This is all now this nice open green area along the river. And this is a picture inside the manufacturing plant. You can see there's several of the locomotives, the cabs on the top of them here, and here are the Caterpillar tracks. The huge lathe here that they used to make the parts for the engines. And the machinery from this plant is still in existence. It's in a small machine shop up in Stanley, Wisconsin. Another thing they made was the Phoenix Centipede truck. And they used the same Caterpillar tracks, and this is sort of like a World War II half-track thing. And here they're using it to pull a road grader on the road. And here they're using it to says it hauls 5 4-horse loads out of a gravel pit. So it had quite a bit of power to it. And one of the later things that they made there during World War II in the Phoenix plant, they made sections for the old Liberty ships, the World War II emergency cargo ships that they built. And up in Superior, I believe, is where they actually built them. But they made all these sections for them and shipped them up there. There was so much work that it was farmed out to many different plants all across the country. And so that Phoenix did their part for World War II. This is going up along the Eau Claire River. This is the old linen works. This is on the south side of the Eau Claire River where the Sioux Depot used to be, which has just been torn down. It was right in the area just above Dewey Street. And you see there was a dam there. And this was a chute that they had where they could run the lumber ass down the chute rather than over the dam. If they ran them over the dam, they'd break up, but they could run them down. They would flex enough that they could run them down through this sloped chute. It's sort of like running the water slide. This is the second dam on the Eau Claire River. This is about where the footbridge is now. There was a dam that was actually had a road across it. See, they have a road comes down the hill here and goes across the bridge. This is the old Mcdaniel Manufacturing Company that just burned down a year ago, I believe it was. And they manufactured saws and machinery for the sawmills. But the dam was mainly the operation of the Eau Claire Lumber Company. Here's a picture of the dam. This is the sawmill of the Eau Claire Lumber Company, and here's the McDonough building up behind it. Well, now the footbridge goes right about across here. This is Mount Tom up in the background. Now this is the McDonough building. This is the part of it that just burnt down, and now they've completely removed the whole building, and they're going to realign Galloway Street in that area. As you can see, there's quite a bit of fill has been added in since then. This is the way it looked not too long before it burnt down. And this is one of the big bandsaws that they made in the McDonough works. Well, of course, the Mcdaniel Works is still in operation, and they're out, located out near the airport in that industrial park. And if you walk across the footbridge, you can still see the remains of the old wooden dam. They're still there. You can see the old timbers sticking out of the ground on the south side of the river just below the footbridge. Here's some of those, a close-up of what they look like. That's the footings of the old wooden dam that was there. And this is a picture of part of an old aerial view from 1891. And this has got the old S-curve two-line railroad bridge here. This was the Eau Claire Lumber Company here. And all of the area where Uniroyal and Banbury Place, where we're making this film, was all stacked lumber from the Eau Claire Lumber Company. And the old roundhouse sat just to the north of Wisconsin Street. Well, this is an early picture of the Gillette Plant, which was the tire plant. Made Gillette tires. They had the old symbol was a big white wall tire with a polar bear standing through the middle of it, and it said it was a bear for wear. So this was in 1913. This was also the first radio station, WTAQ, and this was their transmitting towers. It was part of the Uniroyal originally. But Gillette became Uniroyal. Here they had a fire in the plant. This is about 1920 or so. See, it says Gillette Rubber Company. Another picture of that fire. And this is when the Uniroyal was in its heyday along Galloway Street. All the big exhaust pipes running out the side, and there was a constant hum of machinery when you went by there. And the big overhead walkway that goes from building to building on Wisconsin Street. This has now all become the Banbury Place. So many different companies are now operating out of this building. And there's an aerial view of it. Across the river from Banbury Place on the south side of the Eau Claire River is an old cave. It goes back in about 100 feet. And in the 1920s, there was a gal by the name of Violet Lay who lived in this cave, and along with her, I believe it was her grandmother or her mother, I guess it was. And she wrote poetry for the Eau Claire leaders. And they walled off the front of the cave, and they lived in this cave for a while. And how they got away with it with the Board of Health or whatever, I don't know. They probably were eventually run out for that reason. But she wrote some pretty weird poetry, and it was published in the Eau Claire Leader. Well, now we're going to talk about a few houses in town. This supposedly is the oldest house in town. This is on Gray Street, just south of the bus exchange area. This would be where the old Tanberg Auto on the right was, and the Christian Science Church is on the left, and over behind is the Christ Church Episcopal. Well, this is the home of R.F. Wilson, and he was the fellow who laid out this part of Eau Claire. In fact, he laid out the park down there, Wilson Park, was named after him. This house was built in about 1855 and was moved down here from another location. And I guess it's soon to be taken down. It's in pretty tough shape. I'm almost wondering if it might be a log house, because you notice the outside corners of this thing taper out. It's got a kind of a flare to the outside of it. It might actually be a log house underneath. I'm not sure. Well, there's another house. This was, I believe, 1871. This is the Schlegelmans Mcdaniel house. This is part of the Eau Claire Museum, the Chippewa Valley Museum, and they run tours of it. It's a very unique house. It's very up to date. It has both electric and gas light system. And the Schlegelmans was a hardware man and gunsmith who had his offices down on Eau Claire Street. It was a famous old Schlegelmans building. But we had so many fires in Eau Claire that he proposed this idea of building all our downtown buildings out of brick. And ever since then, all of the buildings have to be fireproof that are in downtown Eau Claire. This is a view from the top of the hill. This would be Seaver Street. This is Farewell Street, and Barstow Street is over here. This would be the Wilson Park area. And you notice the building in the middle of it, that was the old courthouse until 1873. Instead of calling it Wilson Park, at that time they called it the Courthouse Square. The press company was in this block until they just recently moved to Electric Park out toward Chippewa. This was the old Bartlett School. This is where the high-rise assisted living building is now. And there's practically no houses that are on this picture. They're still there, except for this old one here with the four-way split roof with an old brick house. And the next one down here was the Cobblestone House. And then there's one way down the street down here on State Street was the farmhouse to the Eau Claire Lumber Company farm. Now this is looking right down the length of State Street, which comes into Barstow at an angle. This would be the State Street Hill. This is the Chippewa River over here, and you can see part of the old log booms for this sorting works that went to the mills that were down along Market Street and Menominee Street. And of course there's no college out here. This is all a big prairie out there, and that's where the Eau Claire Lumber Company farm was. Well, this is that old house on the corner at Wilson Park. The old brick house with the four-way roof is still there. That was there in 1868, so that's a pretty old house too. And this one is the Cobblestone House. This is on the corner of State and Barstow. And this was built in 1866. And this was made out of round cobblestones. And they hauled them from the riverbank in wheelbarrows and laid them up in the plaster. And this is just a nice view of South Barstow Street with all the elm trees in color. I think this has been widened out now a little bit, and I don't think all those trees are there anymore. This is the few pictures from the old Eau Claire Illustrated book that was put out in 1891. And I don't know if you recall the one that was reprinted. They had just one or two copies of it, and they completely reprinted the whole book here a few years ago. Well, these are copies from that old book. This is the A.A. Cutter House on State Street. And Cutter made his money in the Cutter Shoe Factory, which was located where the public library is now. And this is the way the house looks. It's still there in all its grandeur. And this was the Drummond House. This is right on the corner of State and Summit. And David Drummond, he made his money in the meatpacking business of supplying the logging camps and the city, and had the Drummond Packing Company, which was on the Eau Claire River just to the right of Highway 53 going north now. It's now, I believe it's Armour owns the building now. And this is the way the Drummond House looks today. This is the Winslow Arnold House. This is behind it on Oakwood Place. This has a very unique corner chimney with the window built right into it. There's a big fireplace on the inside, and then this very unique window built into the side of it. A lot of these old houses had this covered portico so that they could load into the carriage without having to get wet. This is a house a little bit further down on State Street. This is the picture from the old 1891 book. You notice the size of the trees on here. And this is the way it looks today. The trees have grown up quite a bit. And this is that old Eau Claire Lumber Company farmhouse down on South State Street. You can see the style of it is quite a bit different than all the other houses. Got the look of an old farmhouse, which it is. This is at 1517 State Street. This is the Walters house. This was over on North Barstow. This was the Walters that had the Walter Brewery. This was the Mayor George Buffington's house on Ann Street, and it was one of the grand houses of its time. And it's still there, but it doesn't look quite so grand anymore. It's sort of an apartment, and there's been many rebuildings of it and re-sidings, and it's still holding up though. It still has pine trees in the front yard. This is the Ingram House on 3rd Avenue. This is a very unique house. A famous designer that built it has these strange curved walls in the front. They're actually built on a curve. This also has a big carriage house out on the back. This is right on the corner of 3rd and Lake Street. Another house on 3rd Avenue with a turret tower on it. This is the George Johnson house on Broadway Street, another very nice Queen Anne house. This is from the old 1891 book. And the way it looks now, it looks pretty much the same, in very good condition yet. Well, there are a few other interesting old houses in the area that are a little bit out on the edge of town. This is an aerial view taken in 1937. This is State Street. This is Hamilton Avenue. There was a tree in the middle of the road on Hamilton Avenue. This is where the old airport was, just to the north of Hamilton Avenue. This is Grover Road going to the west. This would be Lois Creek Road here. This is all open farm country in here. Well, here was the Hamilton Estate. It was an area about this big, had this big big house here, and had this beautiful big curved drive with gateways that came out onto State Street. Had horse barns and training tracks. It was quite a remarkable estate. Then there was the Ingram Estate was down here. This is where the Emmanuel Lutheran College is now. And this was the driveway. It is now Heather Street as part of the Corydon Heights housing area. And this was the driveway originally to the Ingram Estate. Well, this is a picture of the Hamilton Estate. This is the big house and the big curved drive. This, I believe, was tennis courts. And here you see the horse training track and the horse barns there. It was quite an elaborate layout. They also used to train their horses on the old track that used to be on the west side of State Street, where Putnam Heights area is now. Well, this is Grover Road going here, and this is some of the outbuildings of the Ingram Estate was across the road. This is the old house of the Hamilton Estate. The Hamiltons were the ones that started the National Pressure Cooker Company. This house is still there, but it's completely hidden from State Street or from any of the road on Park Place. The trees have all grown up around it, and unless you get right into the yard, you can't see this place. You can drive all the way around Park Place. Road goes all the way around it, but you only maybe in the wintertime you get a glimpse of it now and then. But the old gates where the roadway was, the old driveway went up, are still visible to the north and to the south of the Park Place streets. You'll find these old gateways still showing amongst the lilac bushes. They're nice brick entrance gates. And this is the Heather Street. This is the entrance to the Ingram Estate, which was their grand drive that had the big gates on either side of that too. And this is the grand house at the Ingram Estate. This is now the administration of the Emmanuel Lutheran College. This was built in about 1922. And it was built by Orrin Ingram's son Erskine, pardon me. And it's 3 stories high, and it's still a grand old house. The drive. This was the end of the drive that came in from Heather Street and had this nice big circular driveway at the end of it. This is a view of the back side of the building facing Lois Creek. They had a very nice view off to the valley below it. And this is some of the servants' quarters. This is another one of the outbuildings of the Ingram Estate. Now we're going back and talk about a few floods along the river. This one this is our old Phoenix Manufacturing Company again, and the old office. This is on the end of Wisconsin Street, and Forest Street is right here. You can see the water was right up. There's a man in a boat going along and right on the corner there. This is another flood at a different time. This is a little bit more modern. This is in the 60s. But this is Madison Street. This would be Hobart Street and Forest Street were both underwater. The Madison Street Bridge wasn't underwater, but you couldn't get to it. This is a picture taken in the flood of 1884. This is the corner of Grand and Graham. This is right across from the old main First Star Bank. You see a person is walking knee-deep in the water in the middle of the intersection. And there, those same buildings are still in place on the very west end of Grand Avenue. This is where the Grand Avenue Bridge used to be. It is now the walking bridge. This is looking up First Avenue, somewhere in the 20s. You see there's no paving on the street, and the flood water is right up to Water Street on First Avenue. This would be Owen Park over here. This is in 1967, same place. Water is up to Water Street again. Owen Park has grown up, a little thicker trees in there now. And here's a picture that was taken in 1993 on First Avenue looking north. And the water is even higher. This is in 1967 looking west along a little cutoff on Water Street. This is Water Street that comes in on the curve, and this is that little island. There the people are canoeing down Water Street. This, of course, now this block has all been removed because it's in the house has been removed because it's in the floodplain area, and that's the university parking in there now. This was the intersection of 2nd Avenue and Water Street. The water was running over the road. Cars had to drive through the water, and at part of the time in 1967, they closed Water Street because of the high water. This is on 2nd Avenue up near Hudson Street, I believe. Looks like a grand canal there. This is the Eau Claire River. This is the parking lot across from Northern States. This is the Farwell Street Bridge. The water is right up to the bottom of it. This is the bus depot, it's still there, and the Hipsch Laundry. And this is the old grain elevator that used to be along the railroad tracks, both of which are gone, the railroad and the elevator. And this is out along Highway 85, and that was entirely closed too. The water is running over the top of the bridge and road on either side of it. This is another interesting thing of the past. This is the old Cavalry Barn. This was a National Guard unit, I believe, or it was reserves. It was a reserve outfit. And they had their barns on Spooner Avenue, or Highland, just to the east of the Co-op Shopping Center on the north side where the Consumer Credit Union Bank used to be. This was their old barns. This was there until, probably in the early 50s. But it was not used as a barn anymore. This is the cavalry group all out there in their full regalia. And they used to do a lot of tramping through the Otter Creek bottoms to the between Spooner Avenue and Highway 12, and this is where I grew up in this area. And this is when the cavalry troop came up to Otter Creek. This is the old Co-op Shopping Center. It first started out in 1948. Originally it was a roller rink, and was right along. This was the part that's now the East Ridge Shopping Center. And the part on the very north end of it, if you look, you can still see the round roof sticking up above the other parts of it. But originally it was just a single building with the round roof on it. It was originally a roller rink. This is an aerial view taken in the 50s. It expanded quite a bit. This was the original part of the building. This was another building that was built later with the round roof, and these are all combined together. And later they even combined over to this building and had a walkway across here. That's since been taken out again. Behind is the old 4-H barns. They were built in the early 40s to be for the 4-H fair. But during World War II, they used this as a prisoner of war camp. They had Italian and German prisoners of war that were brought over, and they completely surrounded it with the barbed wire entanglement and guard towers with searchlights and machine guns, and they had these prisoners of war, and they had them working in the Lang Canning Company. Well, this is another thing out in that general area. This is just north of Claremont Avenue Bridge over Otter Creek. This is the remains of the old woolen mill. You can see the remains of the dam and the creek and the remains of the wall up here. This is the mill that there was a woolen mill. It was on Otter Creek. There's some more part of the foundations up on the west side of Otter Creek. This is down below the Happy Hollow Tavern. This is the site of another dam. This is what they call the 5 Mile Dam. This is the Altoona Dam. This is the old rock cliff that used to be in the location where the dam is built now. There's the building of the dam. You can see the cliff here on the left. They're got it partway across. This is the part that has the gates in it on the north side of the river. The flow runs in this direction. You notice this building sitting up on the top of the cliff, and there's another one over here. Well, the next picture is a picture when there was a flood came through while they were building this. It caused quite a bit of damage. They lost a lot of their forms and everything. You see the water is right up to the top or to the bottom of that building, and this one is partly underwater. And it destroyed a lot of their forms and cofferdams and whatnot, so they had to go back and start over on it. But this is the way it's finished off. You can see they have the main spillway on the south side, and this is the part with the gates on it. Well, next time, thank you very much.